what we're here to do today is to have a bit of a sort of rush through of a 2-day program which has got to do with looking at coaching skills and improving coaching performance individually and within organizations. Now this is a subject that's very, very close to my heart, and I'll just give you a little bit of context before we go into the content, is because originally, having trained as a psychologist, I started out doing psychotherapy. So I started out actually working one-on-one with individuals looking at some sort of psychotherapeutic issue. And I was doing that actually on projects in Belfast in the mid-1980s. Now, if any of you are aware of the history of Northern Ireland and of Belfast in particular, it perhaps wasn't the happiest place on the planet in the 1980s. And there was a lot of people that sort of needed some sort of help. And I started off working in projects with young people who had been released from the judicial system and were given a second chance, and that was often coupled with some sort of substance abuse problem, either alcohol or drugs. So I spent a lot of time actually sort of sitting in rooms with people and trying to help them to sort of create something better out of their lives. I don't know how successful I was in that, but I did it for a few years. I then got what would have then been known as just getting tired. Maybe today you would have called it a burnout. And I moved over into HR and into training and development, where the sort of target audience was basically the same as I had been working with in the years previously. I've since found. But I spent the last sort of 20 years or so really working in training and development. And for me, the core of that has been in how do you actually enable people to learn better, to cope better, and to deal better with the situations that they're in. So what I'd like to do today is to run through quickly some of the sort of key ideas that are part of a 2-day program. And I'll need your help in order to do this. I don't intend to sort of stand here for an hour just in send mode, send mode, send mode. I'll get very tired, you'll get very bored. Yeah? So we need to sort of contract to do that. So if you do have questions, I would say just fire them out at me, you know, whenever they come up. If they're interesting, I'll answer them. Yeah? So I'll just make that little proviso. But I may say, you know, wait a minute, we'll deal with it later. I have a very simple objective for today. And that is that you walk out of here with something that's immediately applicable. One of the things that I find very interesting in any sort of management or leadership training or development is that you have absolute immediate usability. So I will consider this a useful session if, having walked out of it, you say to yourself, I've got something that I can use on Monday morning or Monday afternoon or Tuesday or whatever, but sometime next week, that you've got some concrete skill that you think, hey, I can do something with that. Yeah? So that's what I'm aiming for. I would also hope that you have a better understanding of what we mean when we talk about coaching as a management style, and not just as a specific skill set or something that managers do aside from what they're doing the rest of the time. Because my view is very firmly based in the fact that coaching as a management style is an integral part of successful modern management. And any of the more successful managers or capable managers and leaders that I've had the privilege of interviewing or working with over the years have really worked from a particular mindset in how they look at human potential, human development, and developing the people that they're working with and around. And the other thing, you have a little bit of an understanding of what you can do a little bit more of and perhaps a little bit less of. You know, we've all got areas in which we say, well, it would be better if I did more of this and less of this, and hopefully today will give you a little bit of a grasp on that. So the first thing I want to do is to get a sense of how skilled you are as coaches. That's the first thing that I would like to know. So now, first of all, who here acts in any sort of coaching capacity with the people that they work with? Just stick your hand up. Yeah? Yeah. Who here gets coached by people that you work with? And I'm leaving the definition of coaching intentionally vague here. Yeah? Okay. Now, let's say we have a scale from 0 to 5. A scale from 0 to 5. 0 is absolutely horrible. Really, really dreadful. Completely unskilled, useless, awful. 5 is absolutely perfect. Cannot be better. 5 is absolute perfection. What I would like you to do is simply make a little mental note of where you would place yourself on that scale. Whether you place yourself at a 0, or at a 1, or a 2, or a 3, or a 4, or a 3.2, or a 4.25, or maybe you might even go into the, well, can I go to the minus, or can I go 5.1, whatever. Just make a little mental note where you place yourself in terms of your coaching abilities. Yeah? You don't have to say it out loud, you just have to think about it. Yeah? Now just nod your head when you've done that. I'm just looking for a non-verbal recognition. This means yes, I've done it. This means no, Paul, I'm not doing it. The blank dead stare means I'm just waiting for the beer later. Yeah? I'm Irish, I can think like that. Yeah? Okay, we've done that. Fine, let's set that aside. Coaching. Where I want to go first is this diagram. Because I think that coaching resides in a mindset. Coaching starts with looking at your assumptions about what you're capable of doing and about how you actually interact and work with people. Now these, if you go to the original definition of the word coach, it comes from the old Middle English word coche, C-O-C-H-E, which means to draw with a horse and carriage. Yeah? So there's an assumption somewhere in the use of coaching about taking something somewhere else, about drawing something somewhere else. When you look back at the development of coaching within management and within leadership, maybe 15, 20 years ago, people were still operating out of a psychotherapeutic model, which is very, very interesting. Because when you look at a lot of the literature written on coaching, certainly in the 80s, the 90s, then it was very much predicated on a psychotherapeutic model. And what I mean by that, it was predicated on an intervention that meant two people, usually two people, sitting down together at a specified time to have a ritual conversation called a coaching conversation. One person was designated the coach, the other person would be designated the coachee, and they would talk typically for 45 minutes or 1 hour every week or every 2 weeks, and that was your coaching conversation. Now that's based on your classical, traditional psychotherapeutic model. Go, oh, I'm screwed up, so I need to go and sit down with my therapist every week. I go at the designated time, I sit down, we have the ritual conversation. I come back next week, I repeat the pattern. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Maybe I get better, maybe I don't. Yeah? Now, funnily enough, that really isn't very effective. That isn't very effective. And I've been in a lot of organizations that have tried to implement those types of coaching regimes, and there's a huge fallout rate, both from the managers who are expected to be the coaches and the people who are in the coachee position. Because it becomes a sort of forced, we have to have this coaching conversation. What are we going to talk about today? I don't know. Shall we go and have a cup of coffee instead? Yeah, let's do that. That might be handier. So what you see now is that a lot of people who are considered good coaches or very effective managers, they use a lot of the techniques of coaching, but they use them in a much more distributive manner, or a much more fragmented manner, or a much more incidental manner. So it can be, 5 minutes having a cup of coffee before we start work. That can be a coaching conversation. It can be sitting down at lunch. It can be walking out to the car afterwards. Okay? And we don't have to call it coaching anymore. We can simply call it good management, good people management, good people skills. And the way to begin to look at that is to think here, is that as a coach, and there are these what we call sort of nested frames. And by ecology, as a coach, the first question you're asking yourself, is this the right time to have this conversation? And am I the right person to be having this conversation with you? Now, that's a crucial question. Because sometimes you may be in a position where you are expected to coach other people. Your boss has said to you, hey, you need to coach your team. But you need to be quite critical of that. Are you the right person? Is it the right time? Yeah? We've all had, I'm sure, at some point in our lives or our careers, the late Friday, shit sandwich. Bad feedback before going home at the weekend. Yeah, yep, it's recognizable. We've all had that. We may have even done that. Yeah? But the question to consider, first of all, is am I the right person to be having this conversation with you about this topic? If you've come to me and you say, hey, boom, I'm having some sort of issue getting my figures in on time, can you help me with it? Then rather than blindly saying, yes, of course I'll help you with it, maybe I'm not the right person to be doing that, even if I am your direct manager. So good coaches ask that first. Is this the right time? Am I the right person? The second thing to consider is rapport. I maintain you can't really coach people if you're not interested in them and if you don't like them. Yeah? If you think someone in your team is A-H-O-L-E, yeah? I have to temper my language because we're going out in the stream and I'm Irish and it's culturally difficult sometimes to rein myself in. But it's very difficult to coach someone that you don't like or that you're not interested in. So you need to be honest with yourself and say, well, yeah, do I really want to invest my time in you? Is it going to work for you? Is it going to work for me? And it's a question that you can ask out loud. The next thing you see up there is goals. There needs to be a purpose. I maintain that there needs to be a purpose for a coaching conversation. That's why, if you go back to what I said earlier, sometimes these initiatives where organizations try to introduce a coaching culture by saying, well, everybody has to have a... I worked in an organization a number of years ago, and they literally said, everybody has to have a coach, and everybody has to be coached. That was it. That was the directive from the top of the organization. Everybody has to have a coach. Everybody has to be coached. How long do you think that initiative lasted? 2 months. 2 months? Yeah, a matter of weeks. Yeah, a matter of weeks. It simply can't work like that. So coaching, good coaching, is a goal-directed process. It asks the question, what are we trying to achieve with this conversation? And then, within that, then you have your techniques, your interventions, the things that you say, the things that you do. And you tell me, what are your tools as a coach? Shout them out.
Ask questions.
Asking questions. Listening. Being critical.
Empathy.
Having empathy. So, asking questions, listening, being critical, having empathy. Anything else? Anything from this side of the room? Because they're dominating it so far.
Well, be interested.
Being interested in people.
Help. Give help.
Giving help. Now, you're all saying things that are very, very valid, and they're all very so-called soft skills. Yeah? Yeah? Experience.
Alternatives.
Yeah? Alternatives. All those things. Okay. I maintain you've got three or four basic tools as a coach. You've got your eyes, your ears, your mouth. And I'm very serious about that. You have your eyes, your ears, and your mouth. Hopefully your brain that's attached to those and that drives those in some ways. But that is your basic toolkit as a coach. And let me say a little bit about what I mean by that. Because if you have your eyes, your ears, and your mouth, these things tend to become important. As a coach, when you're sitting with someone, the first thing to think about is that you cannot not communicate. I have heard numerous baby coaches come to me and say, yeah, we sat down to have a discussion, but, you know, he just didn't want to communicate with me. I said, well, what did he do? Well, he sort of, you know, he folded his arms and he looked at me sort of like, the hell were you? I said, well, you don't consider that a communication? That's a communication. That says something. That's a message. So one of the skills then that you need to have is the ability to meta-comment on that type of communication. Because communication is redundant. It's very redundant. I'm standing here and I'm telling you about communication. I'm saying that, you know, you can say one thing 3 times. And verbal communication is up to 93% redundant. And if you were to listen back to this transcript, you'd see me only just saying that communication is redundant, but we're still engaging in this ritual that I'm allowed to speak and you're sitting there listening. So you cannot not communicate. What's important then is that a lot of the times we are trained to focus on the verbal. Certainly in Western European culture, we're trained to focus on what people say. As a coach, you can get yourself into a hell of a lot of trouble like that. Because if you believe that, if you really believe I have to really intently listen to everything that this person's saying and track it and remember it, you'll fry your brain very, very quickly. Yes, of course you need to be able to listen to what people are saying, but you also need to notice their non-verbal communication and their paraverbal communication, because that is also important. That is also important. There are those old figures about percentage-wise and stuff like that, but that is basically junk research if you ask me. The important thing is that the total communication style is something that you need to be able to pay attention to. So you need to be able to listen to the words and listen to how they are said. Because there is a difference between saying, yes, I agree with you, and yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, sure. There's a difference. Another thing to bear in mind is this notion of resistance. We hear it all the time. Yeah, he's resistant. He doesn't want to change. She doesn't want to change. She doesn't want to do things differently. In my experience, that often says more about the coach than it does about the person themselves. Because it's often a comment about the choices that you've got, the range of flexibility that you've got in your own behavior. It's that very simple thing. If you've got one way of doing something, essentially you're a robot. You know, it's like this bump, 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 bump. If you've got 2 ways of doing things, you've got a dilemma. You know, do I have beer or pizza? Beer or pizza? Beer and pizza is the obvious answer. But if you've got 3 ways of doing something, then you've got the basis of choice. That's where your brain works. So sometimes when you're in a coaching conversation, you need to be able to say, well, okay, perhaps I could suggest this, I could also suggest this, and I could also suggest this. Because people, even though they may be resistant, the meaning of your communication is what the other person understands. And I think a lot of managers could really, really spend time thinking deeply about that one. It's not what you think you're saying, it's what the other person understands. You may stand up and you may think you have given the most inspirational, wonderful speech to your colleagues and that they're completely on board with your new ideas. But if they don't think that, then you've contributed to that, not just them. So what you notice in good coaches is that they always, or they try to always build in a very short feedback loop. Is what I'm saying being understood? How do you understand what I'm saying? What have I just said to you? You know, we do this with our kids all the time. No, don't put your brother's head down the toilet, please. What have I just told you? You've told me not to put his head down the toilet. Okay, great, good. Excellent. I'm glad you understand that. What?
It's not his head.
It's not his head. Don't put your brother down the toilet, yeah? So, also, and this last one here I think is very important. People construct and respond to their internal map of reality. Because what you're working with when you're coaching someone is their internal map of reality. It's not reality. It's their internal map of reality. Here is my map of reality. That's it. After many years, I've kind of figured that this is my map of reality. Yeah? But let's look at this a little more carefully. Let's say we take an incident. And we're going to play, everybody's played tic-tac-toe or noughts and crosses. Yep. Yep. I'm going to draw reality out now for you. We can take any simple incident to illustrate this. Let's just take, for example, brushing your teeth. Brushing your teeth. Now you can think about brushing your teeth right here, right now, in present time. Yep. You can sit there and you can imagine what it would be like to brush your teeth. Yes? Okay. You can also, in your imagination, go into the future. And you can think about brushing your teeth this evening before you go to bed. Yeah? You can imagine that. You can imagine there you are standing in front of the mirror, holding your toothbrush, brushing your teeth. Yeah? We can do that. You can imagine or remember doing that this morning. Hopefully. So you can remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing your teeth this morning. Yeah? So we'll call this my memory. Okay? I can remember it in the past, me. I can remember it. I can imagine doing it right now, and I can think about it in the future. You can also look across the room at someone else. Yeah? So you can look across the room at someone else, and you can pick them out, and you can think about, we'll call this a second position, about someone else. So you can imagine him brushing his teeth right now. Yeah? You can make a little picture in your mind's eye of him brushing his teeth. Yeah? Pick someone, you can think, okay, imagine I can see you in my mind's eye brushing your teeth. It's a wonderful sight. Yeah? So I can do that, yeah? Yeah. You can do that. You can imagine someone else brushing their teeth right now. Yeah? You can imagine that same person tonight standing in their bathroom brushing their teeth. Yeah? And you can imagine them, you can think, okay, I can imagine you standing in your bathroom this morning brushing your teeth. I can imagine that. Maybe your hair is a bit messed up and stuff like that, or whatever. Yeah, I can picture that in my mind's eye. We can go to a third position. We can have imagine like a camera. If there were a camera installed in your bathroom looking at you. Yeah? Imagine that there's a well, there is a camera in here. Yeah, so the camera now is looking at you right now brushing your teeth. Sort of a removed perspective. Right now. You can also perhaps see yourself in the future as if it were you brushing your teeth. And this morning. Now, the only place that is not in your imagination is this. Right here, right now. Everything else that you're thinking about is in your imagination. When you have a coaching conversation with someone, you are working with their imagination. Because you're talking about things that they did, you're talking about things that they're going to do, they're talking about how other people might view them, you're talking about alternatives, but it all happens in your imagination. I think that's very liberating, because this can be changed. If you could imagine it one way, you can imagine it another way. The very real upshot of this is that when it comes to any sort of planned behavior, there first needs to be a mental representation of that behavior at whatever level. It may not be fully conscious, it may be quite unconscious, but any new behavior that you want to implement or develop needs to first literally to be thought out. And the way that you do that in coaching is you push people's thinking into these places by asking questions, by making suggestions, by having comments, by giving feedback. You push people's thinking to these places, and that's how they build up new behavior. So everything that I've just told you is now gone. It's in the past. You have to remember it in order to make sense of it. Yeah? It's just now, now, now. So when you're coaching, because a lot of coaches that I've known, they put a big weight on their shoulders. They say, oh my God, I'm really responsible for this person, blah, 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 blah. No, you're not. People are very creative, very resourceful, very adaptable. You as a coach, your job is to just help them think differently. Literally think differently, because that is the basis for building new behavior. Simple, yes? This means yes? Yeah? Yep, yep. Now, I asked you to rate your coaching skills. And there's the one little technique that we're going to just start looking at. I asked you to rate your coaching skills on a scale from 0 to 5. What number did you give yourself?
2.
A 2. What number did you give yourself? A 4. 4.1. 4. 3. 2. 4. 3. Okay. Did everybody give themselves a number? See, I think that's fascinating. I think that's absolutely fascinating. Because think about what you just did. I gave you a content-free scale, essentially. I said just rate your abilities from 0 to 5. All of you were able to go into your own experience and say, well, I guess I'm a 3. Or I'm a 4. So what does that mean? What does that imply? That implies that in your experience, at some level, you know, if you've rated yourself a 3, you know what a 2 is for yourself, personally. And you know what a 4 might be if you rated yourself as a 3. If you rated yourself as a 4.9, you probably have an image of what 5 is. So, my next question, okay, what did you rate yourself? 3. What needs to happen for you to move to a 3.1? What's one thing that you can do differently to move from a 3 to a 3.1 in your coach? Yeah, that's a question.
I'll stop thinking.
Stop thinking.
Yeah.
And do what instead?
Listen.
Listen.
Because the moment that people start speaking, my mind starts thinking.
Okay.
Why is he or she saying this? Why? What's behind it? Etc. So you start thinking instead of listening.
Listening. So if you were to listen more,
Yeah.
then that would move you from your 3 to your 3.1.
Or perhaps do it for.
Or perhaps to a 4. Okay. But it would move you in that direction.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was your number?
4.
4. So what's one thing that you could do to move from a 4 to a 4.1?
Well, probably
Become more patient. Okay? What would that look like if I were to
Well,
see you?
probably it has to do with listening as well.
Yeah.
Not jumping to, okay, solutions, and where do we want to go, and being result driven.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. How about here? What was your number?
3.5.
3.5. Okay. So what's going to happen? What has to happen for it to move to 3.6?
Also listen better than I tend to do.
Yeah.
As well, check if what you're telling is really found any basis in what is being accepted or at least
Okay.
understood.
So listening and checking what other people are saying, that's going to move you from a 3.5, was it, to the 3.6? Okay. And you can see yourself doing that? Sure. Easy. Now, I don't need to know anything about what that 3.5 actually is, or that 3, or that 3.1, or whatever. You don't need to know about content in order to coach. Content is really overrated. If you focus on content, then what happens is you either plateau, okay? You know, you just plateau in your area of expertise, and you either crash and burn, or you become a micromanaging devil. What you notice about good managers with a coaching mindset is that they're comfortable with process, and they work on process conversations and not content conversations. Because the higher you go up in the organization, there will be smarter people around you that know a hell of a lot more content-wise than you do. Your learning is obsolete. So your ability to engage in process conversations becomes more and more important. This scaling question, this is a core skill that's taught in, it's called solution-oriented coaching. It's one of the key skills that's taught in solution-oriented coaching. Solution-oriented coaching came out of a field known as solution-oriented brief therapy, funnily enough. And that started in the 1970s, late 1970s, and it was a guy called Steve DeShazer, who's now unfortunately passed away, and his wife, Insoo Kim Berg. And what they did is they were quite sort of anomalies within the therapeutic community because they were statisticians. They weren't therapists, they were statisticians. Steve DeShazer, I think, originally trained as a mathematician. And he was interested, because he was working at the Milwaukee Family Therapy Center, and he was interested in the question, what is it that makes the effective therapists effective in terms of their behavior? Okay? What is it that they actually do that causes people to have less sessions, become more independent, more self-adaptable in a shorter time frame? What do these people actually do? So they just sort of stuck cameras in the room and started taping sessions, and then they started listening to and decoding the language that people were using, the questions that people were asking. One of the things that they discovered that very effective interventionists did was use scaling questions. Because a scaling question does a very, very funny thing. We can all answer it. We can all answer it. And it presupposes that there's movement. So if you say, it doesn't matter what the problem is, it doesn't matter if somebody says, yeah, I want to blow my head off with a shotgun. Well, on a scale of 0 to 5, how committed are you to doing that? Yeah. You know, well, yeah, I guess it's a 2. Yeah, so well, maybe we need to move this the other way. Maybe we need to get this down to 0. What's it going to look like? But the thing is, you can scale anything. You can say, you know, how motivated are you to deal with this issue on a scale where 0 is not motivated and 5 is very motivated? Okay. How serious is this? How is this going to impact upon the client where 0 is no impact and 5 is a horrendous impact? Where is it? And then all you need to be able to do is talk about the scale. What has to happen for it to move one way, or what has to happen for it to move the other way? Then you free yourself of the content and you focus on talking about the scale. What will 5 look like? Yeah.
Question.
Sure.
That implies that the coach and the coachee, both, at least one of them needs to have an idea on really how to solve this, how to improve it, how to decrease it.
And that's, yeah, so somebody needs to have an idea. I'm repeating it for the web stream. Somebody needs to have an idea of how to solve it. Yes, and usually that person will be the person who's coming with the issue. Yeah? Because I think, frankly, as a manager, if you give people too many answers, you rob them of the ability to learn themselves. So if somebody comes to you with a problem and says, I really don't know how to do this, say, great, wonderful. Okay, let me help you explore that. Okay. And you can say, well, on a scale of 0 to 5, where this is if this is a problem, is it a little problem, is it a big problem? And, well, it's a 3. Oh, it's right in the middle. Okay, so it's not that bad.
But in that sense, a wise man once told me, a question is an implicit command. If you question yourself over and over and over and over and over, in the end you'll find no.
Yeah.
You just drive yourself through it.
Yeah.
So that makes coaches obsolete.
Well, I think your job as a coach is to make yourself obsolete as quickly as possible. And I'm absolutely serious about that. If you're in any sort of coaching relationship with anybody, my job, and maybe some people just think I'm lazy, but I've always regarded my role is to get away from that engagement as quickly as possible, within minimum, because what I want to do is enable the other person to solve it for themselves.
But it's coaching for problem solving, but there's also coaching just to help people on their...
In the same, also for that.
But there's never a plateau for that.
Is there? No. No. With the scaling question, okay, I want to just you to practice it with each other a little bit. Yeah? So I want you just, randomly pair up. Well, it'll be the person beside you. Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering, this is only working when somebody also knows how to get there. So as a coach, you can get back to question, how do I do that?
That comes later. That comes later. Yeah? Okay? Yes, you're right. But for the purposes of trying to cram this into 1.5 hours, just for 5 minutes, pair up with the person beside you. Call yourselves A and B. That's fine. Person A says, okay, I've got this. Pick a real issue. Then you'll find out how this can work. Pick a real issue. So here's something that stinks. Yeah? Or here's something I want to improve on. Yeah? The person who's being the coach, what I want you to experiment with is how many different ways can you flex yourself with just using a scaling question. Yeah? Just using a scaling question. The other limitation that I'm going to put on you is that the why question is not allowed. And we'll come to that later. If I hear the why question, then we'll have to do a physical intervention. What does that look like? Yeah. Please stand up. Okay, good. Yeah? But simply practice it, just a couple of minutes. What I would like you to just get a feel for really is, okay, this thing of scaling. So somebody says it's a 3. And play with both ends. So what needs to happen so that it becomes a 4? Or how come it's not a 2? What are you doing well? Boom, boom. Just play with it a little bit, 2-3 minutes. That's it. Fine. I'll give you a sign when we need to move on. Do it. Okay, folks, if I could have your attention. Yep, no problem. Okay then, well, I mean, on a scale of 0 being very difficult and 5 being very easy. How easy was that? Yeah. No, seriously, any comments, questions about scaling questions? If you just go, yeah, I understand it fully, yes?
You need a technique to come to the right scaling questions.
Well, you need an issue to come to the right scaling question, yeah. And the way to think about it is just, whatever somebody walks in with, somebody says, look, I'm having problems with X, Y, or Z. You need to get a little bit creative and think, okay, how can I scale this? Do you scale the issue itself? Do you scale somebody's ability to deal with it, their motivation, or whatever? Once you start really thinking, like, it's also something to not do all the time. Yeah? It's Friday, we're approaching Friday evening. It's maybe not going to be fine to go back to your family and start, well, on a scale of 1 to 5, dinner was really wonderful. Oh gosh, but the wine's not so great, man. So it is a specific technique. It's a process technique. But I hope that you can notice that it allows you to actually get into a situation and help unlocking people's thinking simply by pushing them in a different way of thinking.
What helps you as well, I think, in asking open questions.
Asking open questions, yes.
Saying the yes or no questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good technique.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very simple. Very simple. There's another question that I'd like to ask. And maybe all of you, just think about some particular issue that you're facing in your work or your personal life at the moment that you would like to be different. I'm not going to ask for any content from anybody about this. But just think about one particular incident, what's the word? Issue, that's the word, thank you. One particular issue in your life that's real for you at the moment and you would like it to be different. My sort of assumption when I say different is you would like it to be better in some way, or you'd like some sort of resolution. Yeah? Has everybody got something? Yeah, we've all got something. It can be a small little thing. Yeah? Maybe for the purposes of this exercise, on a scale of 1 to 5, pick something that's sort of down around a 1 or a 2. Don't pick the 5, the collapse of the family and the divorce that you're going through at the moment. Let's not go there. Yeah? Yeah? But you've got something. Yeah? Now, I'd like to ask you maybe a little bit of a strange question, if that's okay. Am I allowed to do that? Yeah? I'd to ask you a little bit of a strange question. I'd like you to imagine, and really imagine with me, that you go home this evening, you go to bed, you go to sleep, you wake up tomorrow morning, and this issue, whatever it is completely and utterly solved. Boom. It just is. It's solved. Everything is perfect the way that you want it to be. You don't know how. It's as if, a little fairy came in the middle of the night and sprinkled magic dust over your dreams, and you wake up tomorrow morning and this issue is completely 100% solved. What will that be like? What will that be like? What will you be doing differently? Just think about that. What will you be doing differently if this issue were 100% solved? You don't have to know the hows, you don't have to know the whys, it just is. What are you going to be doing differently? You don't know what you're going to be doing differently. What might you be doing differently? Nothing. It's just, oh, okay, fine. Then it's solved. It's not an issue.
I may notice it for a week and then I forget it.
Maybe. Okay.
Small thing.
Yeah. Just think about that. What might other people notice about you that would be different? What might your friends notice? Or your family? Or people that know you well? Or your colleagues? What might they notice? What might they see in what you're doing that's, if it's related to that? You got something? You got an idea? You don't have to tell me what it is, okay? But you really just think about that. Okay? And what might that feel like? What might it feel like?
Less stress.
Yeah, again, fine, okay, yeah, fine, okay, good. You all got something? Okay. Now, what did we just do? Where did we go?
Creative goals. Push the thoughts into the future.
Push the thoughts into the future. We did what's called, in brief coaching, they call it the miracle question. Funnily enough, that's what it's called. As a technique, it's called the miracle question, future perfect. There's a variation of it up there. But it's interesting to sort of just look at the question and think about how it works. Because essentially, what I did, I first asked you for permission. Can I ask you a weird question? People, yeah. So you got psychological contract. Yeah, you can ask me a weird question. I'm fine with that. And then you say, suppose. It's conditional language. It's might, could. You go tonight, this issue just gets solved as if by magic. You don't know, what do you notice? Now what that does, it forces people into a thing that's called pseudo-orientation in time. You imagine that you're in the future. We do it all the time. It's what our brains do. You know? You're driving down the freeway and you're thinking about what you're going to say when you get into work. That's pseudo-orientation in time. It's just what your brain does. But that's how you build new behavior. Now, what did I not ask about? Content. I don't care about content. It bores me. But all of you were able to sit here and think, if this were different, maybe it would be like this, or it could be like that. And then, of course, in a conversation, once we start to verbalize that, then we've got, well, I could do this, I might be able to do that. What would that look like? What might you do? You can start to conditionally build up what the solution might look like. And we do this in a way that actually doesn't talk about the problem at all. This is a solution-oriented approach. Right? Some of us are very well trained to look at problems and analyze problems. Coaching, good coaching, is a solution-oriented approach. Because you have to literally learn how to help someone think about the issue differently. I have a very basic premise in coaching people. If you have to sit with somebody and have a coaching conversation, if they could have solved it themselves, they would have solved it. People aren't stupid. You know, so part of your role is to help them out of the rut that they're thinking in. And this is what you do. It also has a thing called as-if framing. As if. So let's pretend, imagine. It was the old classic technique that they used to use in the 1980s when teaching people how to give presentations. Because, you know, fear of speaking in public is one of the #1 public fears. So people who would go on a presentation skills course, of course they wouldn't want to speak in public. They'd say, I'm scared of speaking in public. I don't want to speak in public. I don't like it. And it does no good to say to someone, well, stand up and do it. It's easy. Because the person goes, no, I'm scared. So the classic technique that is used in order to build that skill is, okay, I don't want you to do it. I want you to stand up and I want you to pretend that you can do it. Just for 30 seconds. Just stand there and pretend as if you could speak confidently in public. It's the same thing for a lot of issues that people bring into coaching. Imagine as if you could motivate your team better. What might that be like? Imagine as if you could have that bad news discussion in a more respectful way. What might it be like? Once you start using that type of language, that as if and the might and the would and the could, that allows permission in your brain. It's only problematic when you say, you should. Because that's usually not yourself, that's usually your parent. Yeah? Someone else, you should do it, yeah? And it has a solution focus. We're looking at what could be different, what might it be like. Does that make sense? Yeah? Now, the last thing that I'd like to maybe introduce, and this is something that when we spent 2 days, we spent a lot of time looking at levels of coaching. Because I think one of the key distinctions that you have to make when you're talking with someone is at what level does this issue lie? How simple or how complex is it? Now let me give you an example of that. Let's say I take my driving test. Very simple activity. I've passed my theory test. Now I need to go out on the road in the car and I need to just demonstrate that I can drive. That's the scenario. So I take my driving test, but it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. You know, the car is total loss. There's a number of insurance claims against me. It really hasn't gone well. There are a number of ways that I can look at that situation. The first thing that I can do is that I can look at it from an environmental point of view. I can ascribe meaning to it at an environmental level. I can say, well, actually it was too early in the morning. It was during the rush hour when I was doing my driving test. That wasn't a good time. Yeah? And actually they decided to do it on roads that I wasn't used to. So that made it really, really difficult for me. So I can talk about where it happened and when it happened. Okay? So that's it. That's why I failed my driving test. So the solution might be, well, the next time all I have to do is do it at a different time and a different place maybe. I can also go all the way around here to this identity level, and say, well, the reason that I failed my driving test is because I am essentially a screw-up. I'm just a non-functional human being. Now, which one of those descriptions includes more of me? The first one or the second one? Environment or identity? Identity. Often when people come, when you sit down, you have a coaching conversation, the types of words and sentences that they use will give you a clue to how complex internally this issue is for them. And it gives you a clue as a coach as to where the solution might lie. So essentially you move around this from environment, behavior, capability, how and why. If we take the driving test situation again, I can talk in terms of behavior. I failed because I went too fast. You know, my reversing skill was not good. I hit that cyclist and I didn't mean to. And yeah, and I stepped on the brakes too hard. That's behavior. Okay? So we need to change behavior if we need to solve that. I can talk about capability. Well, I guess my observational abilities aren't that great. I can't read the road very well. Yeah, and I'm not really observant about what's going on around me. So maybe we need to talk about those. Values, we can say, well, yeah, this driving, it's not really that important, is it? You know, as long as I can get from A to B without killing anybody, then it's good. So where's the big deal? Yeah? So the way people present an issue to you will often indicate how complex the issue is. So the filter to put on is to think, what are they talking about? How are they describing the issue? Are they describing an environmental issue? Are they describing a problem that takes place in a certain place at a certain time with other people? Is it just that? Because that's usually quite a simple solution. Or are they coming in, or are you sitting and they're saying, well, yeah, I'm just not good enough, I'm not, whoop. Because it takes a little bit more work the more you go around this circle. gets a little bit more complex, and it requires a different type of intervention. The way that you deal with we call it a small c issue at the level of environment is different from the way that you would deal with an identity issue with people. Different interventions are required. Okay? Yes?
The environmental, I mean, if people blame the environment,
Yeah.
they could be looking for excuses and avoiding that I'm not good enough or I'm really doubting myself or any other.
So if they're blaming the environment, they could be misplacing the cause. Possibly. But again, you need to ask a few questions to find out if that's really the case. And usually a few questions will get you there, or get you close, yeah. But again, this is just like a sort of first filter. So the key is, you know, we say you got your ears. It's like use your ears. Where and how is this person describing this issue? What are they talking about? Now, in terms of the actual interventions, we don't have time to go into them. You know, if you want more, you'll have to come to the 2-day program, I'm afraid, yeah. And then we can look at the types of things that you do. Yeah. But the last thing I would give you is here. Okay, here's a set of questions. Now, some of you may have seen these before, but I think this is your minimum. This is if you are disabled, or incapacitated, and unable to do anything else, then this is the minimum set of questions that you need to sort of have imprinted in your brain to have a useful coaching discussion. And they're very, very simple. And I'm sure all of you, or most of you, will certainly have seen these before. But my premise to you would be that if you construct a coaching conversation around these types of questions, you will achieve 90% of what you need to do. You don't need you'll get these slides afterwards, yeah? Yeah? Who has seen them before? Show of hands. Some of you will have seen some of them before. Okay, I'm going to run through them quickly. Now, the first one, the goal question is, what do you want? You know, what do you want? What do you want from this conversation? Or some variant of that. What do you want? So you need a goal for a coaching discussion. And we need some evidence. How will we know when we have it? Yeah, I want to be able to have a more successful bad news conversation with a colleague in 2 weeks' time. Okay, that's what I want. I want it to be a better conversation. Well, how will you know when it's better? What's that going to look like? What are you going to say? Okay. How do you imagine that how do you want them to respond? You need some evidence. If you don't have that, it's just a guess. Okay? You need a context. When do you want it to happen? No, you know, a goal is useless unless it's got a place. It's got a context. I want to have this discussion. When do you want to have it? Because nobody wants anything all the time. We want things contextually. Somebody comes in and says, yeah, I want to be super confident. Yeah, I want to give off an aura of power all of the time. All of the time? Really? All of the time? I don't think so. Context is important. What will happen when you get it? You need to talk about consequences. Actions, what's your first step? Now, what question is missing from this list? Why? How come? Yeah, because I said don't use it.
Why is into the past?
Oh, yes. Why, I think, if you only ever do one thing, to improve your coaching ability, it's monitor your use of the why question and reduce it. You know? I used to say to people, don't use it. Yeah, but I'm a little milder now. Yeah? And the reason for... They kept asking why exactly. The reason for that is actually quite pragmatic. A why question usually gets you one of two things. It gets you rationalization and it gets you history. It's a good question to ask if you want to go to sleep as a coach. Well, why is this happening? And then the person starts off in their story and then you can just go and get your cup of coffee or whatever. I must admit that sadly, it's not when I've been working in a business and coaching environment, but when I worked in a therapeutic environment, I fell asleep twice with clients, having asked the why question, because they just go, it's the ritual conversation, off we go, bump, and then I just sort of nodded out, and then, oh my God, that was not perhaps the most professional of things to do, Paul. Yeah? But why typically gets you rationalization? Because it gets you because. So it can be a good way to build up resistance, if you choose to do that. If your goal is to build up resistance and to make it more difficult for people to change, ask them a lot of why questions. It's your choice. A better question is how come? How come? Why also gets you values. Why did you do that? Well, because I think standing up for myself is important. Or because I think being professional is important. It gets you values. It gets you things that people hold very dear. But in a coaching conversation, sometimes it can be easier at first to minimize it a little bit. So my invitation to you would be perhaps in the next few days to consciously monitor yourself a little bit. You know, you may say, well, you know, you may set a little scale for yourself. You know, 0 to 5, how easy is it going to be to minimize my use of why questions and follow that through the week. Yeah. But it's a question that is very, very overused, and it's a lazy question. It's a lazy question. Yeah. The other thing to think about is the last one, the ecology question in coaching was, is it worthwhile? Is it worthwhile? Because a well-constructed solution, think of it like a table. Think of it like a well-built table. What I mean by that is that if you have a well-built table, you can kick the legs of the table and it will stay standing. You can say, well, is it really worth doing this? You know, given everything that we've talked about so far, is it really worth your effort and commitment in order to change this or do that or implement this? Is it really worth it? And if the person genuinely says, well, yeah, it's worth it, you can kick the legs. If a goal is well built, you can kick the legs. If you kick the legs of the table and they go, well, hang on, if I really think about it, yeah, it seemed like a good idea, but perhaps it's just a bit too much work. Then we're back to the start. Well, what is it that you really do want instead? And this is also something that I've noticed that a lot of coaches are scared to do. They think we'll help somebody develop a goal. Yeah, what do you want? How will you know when you have it? What's your first step? Wonderful, let's do it. No, be critical. Be critical. If it's a good goal, it will stand up to the criticism. If it's not a good goal, it wasn't worth going for in the first place. Make sense? Yeah. Now, the question with the green in it is also a little bit to do with the why question, because that replaces the why haven't you done it? Why haven't you done it? Which is also can be quite a finger-pointing question. Well, why haven't you done it until now? Well, but what has stopped you up until now? It sort of unloads the future. It says, well, what has stopped you? Not what's stopping you. Because if I say what's stopping you, that continues through time in language. The thing that's stopping me now will be stopping me tomorrow. If I say, well, what has stopped you up until now, I open the door to the future. So, folks, I would encourage you to use this as a sort of basic starting point for your coaching discussions in the coming days. We've looked at this a little bit. We've looked at the miracle question. We've looked at scaling questions. 3 simple things. Okay? Have I given you something that you can use?
Definitely.
Yeah? Are you going to use it? Maybe. Okay, yeah, no, okay. Okay, we've just got about 5 minutes before we'll stop. Are there any questions? Yes.
Yeah, you started, Paul, with the remark in the report. You can't coach you don't like a person. But the other way around,
Yeah.
you don't like to coach.
If you don't like your coach, so you can't coach if you don't like someone, or you can't coach effectively if the person doesn't like you. I agree to both of those things. And sometimes you need to be in the position to actually negotiate that relationship and to put it on the table and say, hang on, you know, we're supposed to be having these conversations, but obviously, or I sense that you're not particularly comfortable with me. Is this really worth doing? Is there not someone else? Yeah. Yes?
Repeat the question. What happens if your coachee gives back? How am I going to do that?
Yeah. Well, the first you have to make the distinction, is it mission critical? If you're coaching on something that, okay, if you've got a deadline of some project that needs to be finished tomorrow, and they come and they're asking you about a really crucial piece, and you know how it should be done, maybe that then is the time to actually just tell them, do it like this, bum bum bum. Perhaps. However, in a more generalized sense, if it's talking about people's longer term development, how do you do it? The question, well, how do you think you should do it? That's the first question. How do you think? You tell me. How do you think? What might you do? What could you do? So you start using conditional language. Not saying what are you, don't say what are you going to do, just say what might you do. So then after that you can say, well, okay, and if you did this, what might that be like? What might that be like? And then you check up on it. Yeah? Yeah, so I wouldn't, because I know it's a very common thing, because you know the answer yourself, to just give it to the person.
It's very difficult not to do
It's very difficult not to do that, yeah. But my take on that is that if you do that, you rob that person of the ability to learn. If you give them the answer. Yeah? You're not doing them any favors by giving them the answer. If you can create an environment whereby they can discover that answer for themselves, longer term, that's better. But there will be instances, of course, where you have to just go, do it like this. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yep. Okay. Yes?
In your opinion, are there different coaching techniques cross-cultural? Are there different approaches? You know, in my job, I have
Yep.
to deal with a lot of international, other-oriented-minded
Yes.
people, and
Yep.
They can react in different ways to different coaches.
Yes, they're definitely, I can only speak from my own experience. I spent nearly 8 years living in Japan. And during that time, I was also involved in quite a lot of coaching of Japanese clients. And yes, it's a very different approach. That was a culture that I was in at that time, where it was much more of a tell and command type of coaching thing that was required, of telling people what to do. So yes, there are. What we're talking about here is very much, yeah, it's a Western European or North American culture of coaching that we're experiencing here. There will be areas where people don't expect that. So one thing that I think can help about that is that if you're working in a situation, is to negotiate the terms of engagement. If I'm coaching you, what do you expect from me? And what do I expect from you? And contract it, essentially. You have a psychological contract. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, folks. We will stop now. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Have a coffee, and then you'll go to your next session, and hopefully I'll see you at some point in the future. Thank you very much for your time.